So now we have, this seemingly Wall Street, finance jumping into Bitcoin with the ETFs we just talked about, potentially even commercial banks globally getting into Bitcoin as we talked about. On the other side of that, we have sort of this warpath of regulations potentially coming down the pipe against Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general. Elizabeth Warren, luckily, she has a horrible track record of getting any bills through. I don't think she's like 300-0 or something like that, 300-1. So hopefully that sticks. But she's trying to pass a bill that's so restrictive, it doesn't make any sense. And you would go, well, she's whatever, over 70 years old, she doesn't understand it. That's why she's trying to put a bill through here. Or maybe it's that because it's so restrictive, it sort of makes it impossible to comply with.
It's the latter, for
right.
sure.
Exactly, right. So, basically, it could make, potentially, if this bill goes through, it could make doing any Bitcoin trends or crypto transactions illegal, I guess, potentially. And it seems like maybe there's an attack vector specifically coming down against self-custody. And so it seems like almost coincidental that let's open up the ETF so everyone can still own Bitcoin, but then we'll put a law in place that no one can custody Bitcoin. So now you have to buy it all through BlackRock, et cetera. Curious your take on that.
I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I was on Preston's podcast, Preston Pish's podcast with American Hodl, and, I have said for a while now that I think every person involved in the space should have in their mental model, Mark, that you're going to get overbroad, draconian legislation passed, not only by the feds, by the federal government, but you will get it passed at some point, whether it's Warren's bill or something else, by states and other localities. And you just have to be prepared for that. It does not mean that Bitcoin is dead or it's going to cripple the market. We all know that Bitcoin is designed purposely to try to not be affected by some of these things. But that doesn't mean that there won't be these sorts of overbroad, vague pieces of legislation that are passed. And what I fully expect, and I've told clients this, is that they will, at some point, again, whether it's Warren's bill or others, they will pass these bills and there will be litigation over them. And from my perspective, I work as a litigator.
In your perspective, you see job security.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, honestly, I can't tell you how many times that a regulation or a law or something has come down that doesn't make sense. And the fortunate thing about our system, Mark, is that you can go forward to a judge, hopefully that will look at it with open eyes and say, you know what, this captures a lot of innocent activity. It's really not appropriate. And they will strike it down. I'll give you a perfect example, and it's at the risk of bringing up a controversial subject, but you got to remember that during COVID, people were talking about a national emergency and how it was, life and death if they didn't put in place mask mandates. And over time, those decrees, a lot of those mask mandates went before the courts, and many of the courts struck them down, saying they were overreaching and overbroad. Okay, that's how the system is designed to work. I don't care if you're the SEC. I don't care if you're Congress passing a law. We live in a system of checks and balances. And when you go before and exercise your rights between hopefully a neutral judge that will look at the issue on its face, he or she will decide, is this appropriate or does this exceed the authority that is granted to Congress? And to me, when you're basically trying to prevent people from storing words in a USB stick, that is
or in their head.
Or their head, self-custody ban. If you try to pull that kind of nonsense, I expect them to lose miserably in the court system. So, but that doesn't mean they can't pass it. Now, this particular bill, I don't think it passes the House. I wouldn't be overly concerned about it, in the short run. But I don't think it's just a mistake that she just doesn't understand the technology. She knows exactly what she's doing. She has aides that are looking at these things, and they're trying to say, how do we twist the knife as much as possible? And it is the next step in a sequence that they have taken in this, aptly coined Operation Choke Point 2.0, where they are trying to make it more difficult to buy, purchase, custody exchanges. You got to remember, custody Bitcoin. You got to remember that right now it is the official policy of the SEC, as set forth in multiple complaints against Binance, Coinbase, and Kraken, that Coinbase is not a registered exchange. They're not a registered broker-dealer. They can't even function as a clearinghouse. That is set forth in papers pending in the court. So explain to me how, if that's their position, that they're not trying to basically shut down the entire crypto industry in the United States. You have the major exchanges. The SEC is saying you can't operate.
But then if that's the case, then why did they make all these ETFs use Coinbase as their custody?
It's a great question. I mean, I think what it stems to is that they got spanked in the court in the Grayscale case. They basically waved the white flag because the court said you're discriminating between the futures product and the spot product, and you don't have a real good basis for denying it. So what can they do? They can do something like say we want cash creates, so we're not going to allow grayscale to get the first mover advantage. They can say we want it all custodied. We can say you want disclosures that the underlying holders like Coinbase and others. There may be questions as to both their regulatory status, and that's all they can do. The SEC has limited jurisdiction. People don't really appreciate this. They can only deny ETFs under specific bases. Their basis for denying it for years has been that we don't know if there's sufficient surveillance sharing agreements to monitor the activity in the spot market. We don't know if it's wash trading or it's manipulated or spoofing, et cetera. So that argument failed. They lost on that argument, and they can do two things. They could double down or just let it go through, and I think they waved the white flag and said, we're going to fight on other fronts. This is not the battle we want to put everything on. We'll let it through. We'll fight on the exchange front in litigation.
They couldn't say that you don't have a registered exchange or registered custody solution, so you can't pass this when you don't have a registered solution?
They absolutely could, but I think the argument they would end up then is they'd be back in court.
Because it seems like if they say, fine, we'll approve you, yes, you can use Coinbase, doesn't that sort of like give Coinbase the legitimacy they need to now, hey, well, you approved us to be their custody?
As bizarre as it is, it does not in the eyes of the SEC. To give you an example, the SEC...
But what about in the eyes of the court? Like precedents or something like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, keep in mind, Mark, the SEC allowed Coinbase to IPO as an entity. They allowed them to come to market as a publicly traded company, and now they're in litigation saying you don't have the right to conduct your primary business function. How does that make any sense at all? That you can come to the market, and what they will tell you is they'll tell you they're different divisions. They're different statutory mandates. We can't question someone's underlying business. We can't tell you it's good. The enforcement division can come in and stop certain activities like the unregistered sale of securities. But that's how weird the government is in some respects. Like there's limited power in different spheres.
Man, there's so much I'd like to dig into there, but we're running long on time.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's just, man, there's so many questions I have there around that part, but I know we're running long on time, so we won't keep digging down those rabbit holes. But to your point, I guess sort of to frame this up or kind of put a pin in this, Elizabeth Warren's team knows what they're doing.
Yes.
It's sort of shifting the public narrative, if you will. And watch out for maybe not this one, but bits and pieces of it coming back over and over and over again in the future.
The one thing I'll add, you brought up a point which is true, that she has a pretty terrible track record, right, for passing legislation. The one word of caution I will tell you is that this bill has a ton of really important co-sponsors. So, most of the bills she's proposing, they're filed with the Senate, and they never see the light of day. They're never debated. They get very little or no co-sponsors. This has very prominent individuals, heads of certain committees that are significant, signing on with it. So that tells me that this is, and I tweeted this out, I think of all the bills that have been passed, presented, that have been proposed, I think this probably has the best chance of passing the Senate.
So she's like 300-0, and maybe this will be her first win before she hopefully leaves office.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But not the House. I mean, the House, I don't think this bill goes anywhere in the House.